So this was a rebuild on my 2012 Ural Patrol, two-wheel drive. So all started, I found some shards of metal on my drain plug, my engine oil drain plug. So I took everything apart and ended up finding out that the oil catch on my crankshaft went out. But everything was running great. Everything seemed fine. I knew that it was just a matter of time till the big bearing went out. After seeing everything. So all said and done, I'm glad that I did. I learned a lot about working on this engine, a lot about the motorcycle. This was my first time really cutting into this too much. The only thing that I'd done before is I replaced the ring on the final drive. I just purchased this motorcycle probably 9 months before this. The previous October, I think this was like mid-late September when this happened. And I just finally got this thing together and running Christmas Eve. Ran into all sorts of issues with it. Lots of frustrations, lots of lessons learned. And so this is my video of the rebuild from start to finish. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot of lessons, broke some stuff, had to replace some stuff that wasn't originally broke. Like I said, it was a huge learning experience. Overall, I'm glad happened, even though it came with about $1,100 price tag, just in parts. The methods that I did things generally followed the myural.com kind of walkthrough, but there was shortcuts that I tried to make, some of which you can see in the video. I tried to take shortcuts and ended up just shooting myself in the foot and ended up having to go the long way anyways. So now I had the amount of time that it took me to take the shortcut and the amount of time that it took me to do it the right way. So this whole project ended up taking me about 2.5 months to finish. Partly because just waiting on parts. I had to get parts from all over the damn place. And the other part was money for the parts. Like I said, it came with an $1,100 price tag. And then just the labor, just the time to do all this stuff yourself, buying specialty tools, waiting for specialty tools to come in, all sorts of stuff. So by here I got the gearbox out. The preparation for the engine for removal was way more labor intensive than I thought, and even more so on the reassembly, which you'll see later. I spent so much time just pulling stuff apart to get the engine out. Brakes, controls, electrical, all of the things. So that was a big surprise. I thought that the majority of the work would be spent actually wrenching on the damn engine, and the engine, once you get the block out, is pretty easy to work on. So here I am making a fool of myself, spilling gas all over the damn place. Because I didn't want to drain the tank. Figured that I could be quick enough to catch it. I pulled the tank before on a previous damage to the fuel tank last Christmas, actually, joking around doing fishtails out in the snow, and ended up flipping it. So it's a very steep learning curve driving these things and working on these things. But the disassembly, or the removal anyways, was, I think, 2 days total, between getting the gearbox out and then getting the crankcase and the main body of the engine itself out. I had help. This is my son. He came out and gave me a hand, so I wasn't focused too much on pulling the heads off. Everybody recommended, pulling the heads. It'll make the engine so much lighter and easier to get out, but I had a workhorse to give me a hand. So got the front cover off. By this point in time, I didn't know what was wrong with it yet. The assumption that I had was that one of the bearings had gone out, either front or rear main bearing for the crankshaft. Just because the type of metal that I found didn't really feel like it would go anywhere else. I had no idea about the oil slinger design, or the oil catch design that feeds the crankshaft big bearings. So I didn't even know to look there. So this entire time I'm sitting here pulling this off piece by piece, looking around, trying to find what this piece of metal could have come off of, and I couldn't. Couldn't for the life of me. So by time I got the crank out and was able to look at all the bearings, I had no idea what was going on. And then I, just by happenstance, found the torn up oil slinger. So what you're seeing here is all sorts of shenanigans, run into issues getting the flywheel off. I ended up turning out the inside of one of the newer hex head clutch plate nut bolts. So I had to get an extractor and pull that, which you saw in the previous clip. And this one was me just trying to get this damn thing off. It involves a lot of elbow grease for sure. One of the issues with this is I couldn't get the harmonic balancer puller to actually seat. The thread would go in and it felt like everything was straight and everything was fine, and then it just got to a point to where, okay, it's starting to snug up, and I get it in there, and then the damn thing would pull right out of the flywheel. Luckily, the threads on the flywheel were still good. The bolts got all buggered up, and I had to go buy new sets of bolts as well. But yeah, just I don't know what it was. The two little extraction bolts on there, it gave me just so many issues. I ended up figuring it out. Yeah, so you'll see here, I get that pulled off. I was trying for a while to just straight pull it off, just to torque it, and then periodically you'll see me on the phone, looking around online. Periodically you'll see me talking on the phone. I've got a couple guys out here in Western Washington that have been working on Urals for a while and have been giving me a hand. Terry Crawford at Crawford Sales has just been an immense source of information and knowledge. So definitely a shout out to him. That guy's helped me out so much with this engine rebuild. And I've learned so much about the engines and the engineering that went into them to begin with from this guy. So here I pulled off the oil pan, found some more of the pieces down inside the oil pan, still looking around trying to figure out where the hell they came from. I was done for this night. And so here I'm on the phone actually talking with a buddy of mine local, trying to talk to him about I think I was talking about the camshaft. I can't remember what the hell. Oh no, I was talking about the pistons, getting the pins out of the pistons. So he had given me some recommendations, so I didn't have to buy any specialty tools. Here I'm trying to fart my way through this thing. But yeah, the engine, the more and more I took this thing apart, the more and more I realized exactly how crudely made these are. I'd been shopping around for a Ural for like 4 or 5 years. I knew I wanted a carbureted one. I knew that I wanted dual drive. I knew that I wanted one with relatively low miles, but not so low of miles that you question the maintenance on them. Because I mean, especially with the carbureted versions, these things are made to run, and people will sit them in their garage for months or years on end. And so I knew what I wanted, and I finally found one. It was a Patrol that the old man who owned it before me had dumped a stupid amount of money in, pretty much bringing it up to the status of a gear up. Added all the bags and cans and fuel cans and windscreens and fairings and all of the things. Spare tire holder, all this stuff. He added all of it to it. So I ended up getting almost a gear up for the cost of a Patrol T, which is like the most basic two-wheel drive model that they had that year, which was awesome, right? But my buddy Eric had let me know and warned me about the 2012s, that they fall into an area with a bad, he couldn't remember quite what it was. He said a bad bearing or something going on with the crankshaft. They were notoriously bad for such and such. I said, yeah, I'll risk it. And well, here we are. So the 2011, 2012, 2013s apparently, when they went with the oil slinger, it is just bent up sheet metal that's been pressed and then spot welded straight to the cheek face of the crankshaft. So you're spot welding sheet metal to like 3/4 inch to like 7/8 inch cast iron. So the spot welder that you're using, the story that I've heard during that period of time failed or was failing. So there was a high number of these things that were separating exactly the same that mine did. So I got one of the newer ones. Apparently, if they have a 10 stamp on them, the crankshafts are the newer style, and this has been rectified. But the inside of the case, like the more and more I pulled this thing apart, the more and more I realized exactly how primitively built these things are. Like I've seen the inside of a Harley engine, I've seen the inside of a Chevy engine, I've seen the inside of a Ford diesel engine, and you leave tool marks and casting stuff on the inside, but the level of the Ural crankcase, I was incredibly surprised. There was huge burls of milled aluminum just like hanging off that like you can pull off with your finger, and at some point in time these things are going to break off and get into the engine. So after I get everything apart, and I knew that I was going to be waiting on parts for a bit, you'll see a little bit later on in the video, I do some cleanup on that, but it was greatly surprising how crude and rough together these things are, how many tool marks are on it. This is the other part of Ural ownership, is making your own tools. So these were a wheel puller, or pulley puller, gear puller, that the teeth are a little bit too thick to get back behind there. So you gotta grind them down, make them a little bit thin. It's kind of a balancing act between just making it barely small enough just to fit in, and not making it too thin and too small that when you go to start pulling it, it's gonna pop off, or break one of your little teeth on there. So yep, getting the crank out, and pull it out. I'm messing with it. I'm looking at the bearings, trying to figure out. And at this point in time, I'm like totally second guessing myself. I have no idea what I'm doing, why I did this to begin with. I could not find where this piece of metal came from. And then just by happenstance, I was messing around and felt that the oil slinger on the front side, or the oil catcher on the front side, was spinning around, and posted a video of it. Van Lee here on the Ural Lovers and Riders, he helped me out quite a bit too. He would take videos and show me different stuff. So yeah, this is just me cleaning it up. I'm waiting on parts at this point, so I'm just kind of doing busy work. I took the Dremel in with the grinder wheel, and all of the milled surfaces, I did about a 45-degree kind of chamfer around the edge of it. I didn't do anything to any of the seal or bearing faces, but all the edges. I took all the edges down because they were sharp, they were burred out, and it was just, one, not something that I kept wanting to deal with, but two, I had nothing but time at this point because I'm waiting on parts from all over the damn world. But yeah, there's, especially on the inside, I don't know how well you can see it on the video, but especially on the inside, there's so many just rough, you can kind of see it here a little bit, but there's just so many rough edges with huge like chunks of milled aluminum kind of curled off of them. So clean all that up. My original plan was to get a solvent tub or take it to a friend's with a solvent tub, and that all ended up falling through, so I kind of made a makeshift parts washer that you'll see a little bit later in here. But tell you what, though, even after all this work, just mostly busy work, but after all this stuff, it looked significantly different. I got before and after stills, and it looked a lot cleaner and a lot better. Mostly aesthetics, but and I had a chance to use that Dremel. I cleaned up some of the tool marks on the outside of the cases as well. I mean, you can see them by looking at your own Ural engine. You've got rasp marks and grinder marks and crap all over the aluminum case. So I just kind of went in and softened things up a little bit. A lot of the casting seams, where the two pieces of a cast come together, they leave those rough, and so you get like big shark fin kind of deals coming out all over your casting. So I just went through, kind of cleaned everything up. What you just saw there was the two oil ports underneath at the bottom. They go down to they drop into the oil pan. One of them was almost completely casted through, like it was a casting error. So I lost probably about 40%, 35-40% of the oil dropped through to the pan. Performance-wise, lifetime-wise, I don't know what it would have done, but I just went in and punched it out and then cleaned it all up with the Dremel. Here's my makeshift parts washer. Just used a water heater pan. Ended up putting a coffee can underneath the nozzle, and yeah, you see the coffee can there, and just rinsed it all off using Simple Green and engine cleaner. At this point, I had everything rubber off of it. I had everything not metal out of it. So parts washer, Simple Green, scrubbed it with a wire brush, rinsed it all out. Rinsed it all out, and then dried it off on my heater. Set it here on the heater for probably about 5-10 minutes. Just let it warm up to the point where the moisture would evaporate off of all the parts, and that was that. So here is the new crankcase. I was looking at it to make sure I had the 10 stamp. Pressed the new bearings on. Yep, fun stuff here. So I took this video in 4K to try to make sure that everything was covered on video. So if I ever got to a spot where I was kind of stuck and didn't know what was going on, that I always had something to go back and reference. And this was one of them. So I'm sitting here. This is the camshaft that I just pressed in. And you see me keep spinning it and keep spinning it and keep spinning it and keep spinning it because it just did not feel right. So here I am taking it back out. Just screwed my whole frame down to the table. And so, pulling the camshaft back out because it felt too
Hello
stiff.
there. So,
here we go.
Ural, 2012. This is the newer and improveder, I guess, camshaft. Had to gut my motor, pull the all the bearings and stuff out, and just doing a rebuild on it. Was very concerned about the timing gear for the camshaft, so I constructed this little jig here that holds everything in place, allows me to align it. So I put the bearing on, and then I was putting this on, flipped it around, and started beating the snot out of it. Got it seated, went to go install it, and what I found was, you can just barely see in here, that it gets all the way to that cup, but it won't go in it. Couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. Started messing around with it. Ended up pulling out a pair of calipers here, and what I found was, it is quite untrue. You'll see that needle jumping all over the place. Oh, as I turn this, there's one spot here that jumps up quite a bit. Yeah, right in there. So inadvertently, without thinking about it, thinking that this cam was plenty hard enough, when I was paying so much attention to the top and trying to protect that timing gear, I ended up mushrooming out the freaking bearing face that goes in the needle bearing cup inside the block. So that was my expensive mistake. $110 to Gene Hollipa, and that's going in the mail tomorrow, and then maybe I can finally get on with this project that's taking me damn near 2 months now. But I love sharing my expensive mistakes with everybody.
So that was definitely the more expensive mistake. Started getting everything back together, waited on that part. It was 115 plus shipping, and it took about a week and a half, 2 weeks to come in. So you can also kind of get an idea of the length of time that has passed by my facial hair on here. I was growing my beard out, so earlier on in the video you can see it a little bit short cropped, and by the end of this it's just this huge massive beard. You can see me out in a t-shirt out for the beginning part of it. Now I'm running a heater and all sorts of stuff, hat and gloves and all the things while I'm working on it. But yeah, it was a process, man. And if you're gonna buy these things, especially if you buy used, you've got to get smart. You've got to have a pretty good collection of tools in order to do this right. Not necessarily expensive tools, but you need to buy yourself some good quality tools if you plan on getting to this point. All said and done, I like the press that you see in the back. I bought that just because I didn't want to repeat what I did with the camshaft. So here I am pressing the gear or the bearings and everything on the camshaft, rather than beating the snot out of it with a hammer like I did the first time. But it just get everything in. I think by this point I had all the parts in, and now I'm just going through the long, slow, arduous process of putting it all together, trying to reference things that I had done in the past. Coming back to the video and looking at things, because by this point it's been like 2 months past. Yep, I got all new gaskets, all new bearings, all of the seals, and then a lot of the bolts and nuts and stuff like that were new, just because I damaged a set and you got to buy a whole set of them. But here's a lot of people say that they don't use any sort of gasket sealant, anything like that. They just use the paper gaskets, and that's cool. And I know a lot of people who do that. And then there's a lot of people who would recommended Indian Head. So you see that little bottle of Indian Head there with the red cap on it. I use that on all the paper gaskets. It's just for me. It has worked. It has worked great. I've used it before. And yeah, so I use the Indian Head gasket sealer on everything, the gasket compound. There's that, and then the new head gaskets. I'll get to that in a minute too. The new head gaskets left me really, really disappointed compared to the old ones, and I ended up, after running into a bunch of issues, pulling the heads again and putting the old head gaskets back on, actually, because all the new ones available are these much thinner aluminum and composite that head gaskets that just feel really cheap. Both head gaskets ended up failing at the same spot. They chiseled through all of the composite compound and mesh and crap in the newer head gasket right into the valve lifter tubes. So both pistons on both valve lifter tubes failed. The head gaskets chiseled all the way through. Talked to IMWA. They said that it was likely damaged during assembly, which I could possibly entertain that idea, but it happened in both at the exact same spot on both pistons. They felt really cheesy, really cheap. I'm not perfect. You can see from this video I've made a lot of mistakes. But yeah, that was a point of contention that I don't think I walked away happy with. But yeah, so torqued down the head, did everything I was supposed to do. Everything was nice and smooth up to this point. So yeah, both the new head gaskets failed, and that was a grumpy day. Flywheel. Oh yeah, putting everything back together. The rear bearing, rear main seal, all that stuff. Getting the plate on, everything went together pretty hunky dory. Oh yeah, I was checking to see what my torque was on this. Got that torque down, got the tab folded over. I think here I'm messing around with the clutch plates, trying to decide how I was going to do the clutch plates. Oh yeah, the freaking timing. So the set here, put everything together, got all the stuff for the timing gear. This has got the Ducati ignition system on it, so it's got a little disc and the hall sensor up in there. And no matter what I did on this, it felt like the camshaft was not in all the way. It left this really weird gap in there, and it actually made the disc come in contact with the hall sensor. So I could not figure out what the hell was going on with it. Ended up pulling the timing cover twice, disassemble, reassemble, trying to figure this thing out. I couldn't figure it out. The camshaft was seated all the way in. The camshaft bearing was seated all the way in, and you can know all that because the retention plate on the timing cover, that seated all the way down nice and flush. So couldn't figure it out, so I ended up just shimming it. And I've put 1,000 kilometers on it since the rebuild, and I haven't had an issue with it. I checked it at 500 and I checked it at 1,000, and it still gapped properly with that shim I put in. So that's a Ural, I guess. So here the engine's put back in. I had a buddy of mine help me. It was late at night getting the actual engine into the frame, so I didn't have it recording. But now just the slow process of putting everything back together. The other part about this was because so much time had passed, remembering where I'd put everything, I ended up buying probably a half dozen other random fasteners from Ace Hardware because I've lost nuts and bolts and stuff like that along the way. And then lots of going back and referencing these videos, seeing how the hell wiring harnesses were, especially the grounds and the stuff going to yeah, all over the place, all of the electrical connections. I you know, most of them are pretty cut and dry, but there's several of them on the back side of the engine that I just could not remember how they were run. Yeah, trying to not repeat some of the mistakes that I made the first time around. So I pulled the whole back end, exhaust and everything out, just to get it out of the way. Which, again, I very strongly recommend doing because you're just going to end up pulling it out later anyways. It's just so much easier to pull the whole exhaust right out the gate. This was a massive pain in the butt. Getting that damn thing aligned was infuriating. I think I got it together, and then I didn't like how the clutch felt, and I pulled it all back apart, and then I'd found that the clutch push rod wasn't doing what it was supposed to do, so I couldn't actually get the clutch cable to attach to the arm on the back, the actuator arm on the clutch. And so that's when I found out that the clutch push rod, it's got a little square end to it. It wasn't inside the clutch plate. So I ended up pulling the whole gearbox back off again and getting everything straightened out. Here I'm trying to get the controls connected, getting everything spaced properly, the shifter and stuff. I've got the jockey shifter too, the mechanical jockey shifter on the right side too. So I had to run all that linkage all over again because all that's got to get pulled out in order to access the engine. The neutral bolt, you just saw that in the video. That neutral bolt was a massive pain. I could not figure out the spacing on it. I knew that I didn't want to put it in any further because it was going to start contacting stuff. But when I removed the wire for the neutral light, when I removed that, the whole damn thing backed out. So I had to get the spacing right on it. Van, again, helped me out. Ended up posting a video describing how to do that with just a battery and an electrical tester, and just figure out when it comes into contact, and get your neutral light little sensor in there squared away. Yeah, this is just the tedious stuff. This is the worst part. Like, by this point, I'm on cloud 9. The engine is together. I'm excited to hear it run. Nervous and anxious to see if I did everything right. But yeah, just slowly putting everything together. Because of how I stored these, so those are the carburetors that you see there sitting on top of the sidecar, inside the plastic bags. Didn't know how to, without disconnecting everything, and I really didn't want to, all of the throttle lines and stuff. So I just pulled them out, wrapped them up in bags to keep junk out of them, and then taped them and set them to the side. I was really concerned as the length of time went on, more and more and more and more. I was concerned about the fuel going bad inside the bowls, about stuff starting to seize and varnish and stuff like that and gum up. But I had added a considerable amount of seafoam to it right before this. So I knew that there was seafoam in the gas, and so I knew that all the fuel in there had a good amount of seafoam in it. So I ended up second guessing myself on that when I first started up and started to run into issues. Really second guessed myself, but it ended up, the carbs were fine. The way that I stored it, everything was good with them. So yeah, just more. I think I'm doing a Kickstarter here. That was a pain in the butt, just trying to figure that out. Ended up taking it off, putting it on, taking it off. The nut had pulled or had stuck onto it, so the bolt shaft kept pulling. It was a massive pain. Way more than it should have been. I don't know if I made it more difficult or what. Yeah, here's me fixing that damn bolt. But yeah, I got that on there and I'll figure it out. I think I installed it upside down once, and it was all jacked up. I kept messing it up. But fixed it, got everything straight. Ended up using some string to tie it into place. Where am I at here? I think. Oh yeah, I'm putting the seat and stuff on here. So we're getting really close to starting this thing up. Putting the voltage regulator, all that crap underneath the seat. Getting all the electrical tightened back. Oh yeah, that was the other thing, is trying to figure out where the hell all the electrical went. I kept going back to my phone. I'd taken stills. Here, putting the exhaust on. When I was doing the exhaust, I found a couple things that were kind of aggravating with this. So these pipes coming off of so you got the down pipes from the pistons, the headers, and the back of them had this additional tab, and it felt so arbitrary. And I don't know if they had done it for an actual reason or what, but it had necked down to probably about 1/4 of an inch more narrow than the rest of the pipe, and then the pontoon mufflers actually slide over the whole damn thing. So it's like, it was weird. It was necked down quite a bit, and it felt like it was just so much restrictive airflow that was unnecessary. So I cut them off. And so you see here, you can kind of see how it was necked down, but just I did that. No good reason. It didn't feel like it should have been like that. It felt like it was unnecessary restriction of airflow. Not that I'm going to add 50 horsepower to this thing at all, but it felt like it was unnecessary. So I pulled those off, especially given that I'm still running the stock exhaust with the pontoons and the tiny little pee-hole freaking exhaust tips on them. But yeah, getting everything lined up, getting all the exhaust put back together, and here shortly, I believe is my first attempt to start it up. I got cocky with it. I was going to totally start it up with a kickstart, and I ended up making myself look like a fool, just sitting there kicking over and over and over and over again. Ended up going to the electric start. It still started up relatively quick. I didn't have to tweak anything or do anything nuts to it, besides adjust the throttle a little, because of removing the throttle cables and stuff like that. So here we go, coming up on my first start after the rebuild. All right, so here's the moment of truth. Just added all the fluids. Just got everything back together. I'm gonna try doing this. I'm gonna try kickstarting that. Dead cold. Just finished the rebuild. Neutral. Yeah, I was pretty excited at that little rumble it gave. Oh, so close. Oh shit. It felt close. It felt really close. Yeah, so I noticed a hell of a lot of extra noise coming off that left side, and it really concerned me at first. Oddly enough, after I put the stock head gaskets back on it, after the head gaskets blew, so I put like 20 kilometers on this bike after this rebuild, and both head gaskets blew. So I put the original head gaskets back on, and not only did all the problems that I have fix themselves, but this sound went away. I can't describe it. I don't know what's going on. The valve tappets, everything was torqued to where it needed to be, but I had all this extra noise. The only thing that I can think of was how thin those newer style head gaskets are compared to the old ones. So it literally shrunk the length of the head, so the head bolts went on further, and then the tappet adjustment nuts and bolts were like maxed all the way out, because I mean, you essentially lose like a sixth of an inch, like just over an eighth of an inch of thickness in there. So, and then without losing any length off of your lifters. So. But it start and it ran, and got it all back together, and it runs. So that's the rebuild.